Coal is by far the best possible ore you can get in Minecraft. It's something someone would say if they couldn't easily find diamonds. Changes were made with the ore generation in Minecraft 1.17 to 18, which allowed you to explore deeper into the newly generated cave systems to find valuable resources. Going to specific Y levels and biomes will allow you to maximize the amount of ores you can find there. The mining levels may have changed, but with this information you'll be able to find every sweet spot and use mining techniques to get the most of everything. So I'll be covering two types of methods you can use to go mining. The first one being the normal open air cave mining, but just know that some ores actually have a reduced chance of spawning in the open air. So I prefer the branch mining technique, and at the end of the video I'll also show you my favorite way I go branch mining in Minecraft. Another thing to note as well, that you can actually find more ores in some biomes than other ones. For instance, the Badlands actually have an increased chance of finding gold ore, dripstone caves are actually a good spot to find copper, and emerald ores can only be found in the peaks biomes. I'll first start off with diamonds, since they're everyone's favorite ore to get. Now diamonds actually spawn in 3 separate batches. Now the first batch of diamonds spawn in a group of 1 to 4 per chunk, and that's from Y level -63 to Y14. Now these diamonds actually have a 50% chance of not spawning if they're exposed to air. The second batch spawn in a group of 1 to 12 every 1/9 of a chunk, and these also spawn in the same Y range of -63 to 14, and these have a 70% chance of not spawning if they're next to air. Now the last batch of diamonds spawn in a group of 1 to 8 per chunk, and these don't generate if they're next to air. Now with diamond ores, the lower you go, the more common they get, and the sweet spot to find diamonds is actually at Y equals -64. So what I recommend doing is actually going as low as possible in the world to find your diamonds and use branch mining for these, since some of the batches actually do not spawn if the diamond ores are exposed to air. Next, we're going to look at gold. Now gold can actually spawn in every single biome in 2 separate batches. The first batch spawns in a group of 9 spaced out from -64Y to 32Y, where it's most common around -16Y. And actually the higher and lower you go from -16Y decreases the chance of finding gold ore. Now the second batch of gold also spawns in a group of 9, this one being from -64Y to -32Y, and there's an even chance of finding gold at each one of those layers. Now with this batch of gold, there's actually a 50% chance of the gold ore not spawning if it's exposed to air. Now as mentioned before, the Badlands is a really good spot for finding gold ore. They actually spawn in the Badlands from 32Y all the way up to the build limit of 256, or the old build limit of 256. It's evenly spread out for the distribution of gold in this biome, and air blocks do not affect the spawn rate of gold, so there's no reduced chances of a gold ore spawning in the Badlands biome. Now for redstone, they also spawn in 2 batches per chunk. The first batch of redstone spawns in a group of 1 to 10 from -Y equals 63 to 15 evenly. So it means there's an even amount of chance that you find redstone at every one of those levels. Now the second batch of redstone spawns in a group of 1 to 10 as well, from Y equals -63 to Y equals -34. And the lower you go in the world to find the redstone, the more common it will be. So the sweet spot for finding redstone will be all the way at Y equals -64, since the lower you go, the more redstone ore you'll be able to find. Now for copper ore, the best spots to locate them are actually in dripstone caves. They actually spawn from Y equals -16 to Y equals 112, and the closer you are to 48, the more copper you'll find. So the higher you go up from 48, the less copper you'll find, and the lower you go, the less copper you find. Now if you want to find a whole bunch, as mentioned before, dripstone caves are where you can find them, just because they spawn more in these caves. A couple other key spots where you can actually find copper is in beaches. There's also an increased chance of them spawning in beaches, and there's also veins of copper that can spawn from Y equals 0 to around Y equals 56. Next, we'll focus on the iron ore. So iron ore actually spawns in 3 separate batches. The first batch spawns iron ore in a group of 3 to 13, and this happens from Y equals 128 to Y equals 320, and it's more common at Y equals 256, but I've seen on some pictures that it says 232, but the image shown actually shows 232, so I'm going to go with that one. And with this batch, the higher you get to 320, the iron is less common, and the closer you get to 128, it's less common. So the best spot to find iron with this batch should be at Y equals 232. Now the second batch of iron also spawns in a group of 0 to 13, and this is from negative 24 to 54 in the Y. For this batch, the most common spot to find iron is at Y equals 16, and the higher and lower you go, the less iron you would find. Now the last batch of iron spawns in a group of 0 to 5, and this is from negative 63 to 64, and these iron spawn evenly throughout the world, so it's an even chance of finding iron at all these Y levels. Now iron ore also spawns in veins from negative 56 to negative 8, so that's another way you can find iron ore in the world, but the best spot to find iron is probably at Y equals 16, just because you would have to go in mountain biomes to find the other iron ore. Now Lapis in the world spawns in two separate batches. The first batch spawns in a group of 0 to 8, and that's from negative 32 to 30 in the Y, which is most commonly found at Y equals 0, and the higher and lower you go from Y equals 0 decreases your chances at finding Lapis ore. So the most common spot to find Lapis is at Y equals 0. Now the second batch of Lapis spawns from negative Y equals 64 to 64 evenly, so the chances of finding Lapis are the same at every one of those levels. So this batch of Lapis ore can't be exposed to air, so this is only found using by branch mining. Now emerald ores can only be found in the mountain biomes, or actually the peak biomes as they're called, and that's from Y equals negative 16 to Y equals 320. It's most commonly found at Y equals 224 plus, so that'll be the spots where you can find the emerald. Now these emeralds can actually be exposed to air, and you can only find them in these peaks biomes. Now lastly, we're going to talk about the best ore in the game, coal. Now coal actually spawns in two batches as well, and the first batch spawns in a group of 0 to 37 from Y equals 136 to 320 evenly, and the second batch of coal spawns in groups of 0 to 37 as well, from Y equals 0 to 190, where it's most commonly found at Y equals 96, and the higher and lower you go from Y equals 96 decreases the amount of coal ore you can find. Now in this batch, there's actually a 50% chance that the coal ore won't spawn if it's exposed to air, so again, you might find a lot of them just buried deep into the mountains the higher you go. So with all that information, I think that the best spots to find the ores are actually going branch mining at the specific branch levels that they're most commonly found. So just using the information that I gave you earlier about the most common spots to find the ores, you can do that and then branch mine in those areas. But if you want to do the open mining as well, you can do that. So this is actually how I set up my branch mine if I have a lot of resources. You don't have to do this, you can just put a bunch of chests down. But what I do is I go out 2 blocks from each mine, then I go all the way down to the end, to as far as I want to go. And then what I do is I just fill this chest up and then power it with the power rail. And it goes all the way to the end. And what's going to happen is once that chest gets empty, it's going to come back down. And that's how I just pretty much organize my rails, or I guess my mining shaft. And perfect, it comes back empty, just to make sure that I don't run out of inventory space. But anyways, thanks for watching guys. I'll see you in the next video.